be a director, oh, there we go, to be a director or to be more of a senior leader in your role. That's what I'm here to kind of share with today. Some of my experiences right now include at Amazon being able to drive 9-figure type business by persuading the right teams both in Amazon Business, where I operate, but also our retail side. So again, being able to negotiate, create the right product strategy, show the right financial outcomes for the business, which I think at the end of the day, if you are a product leader, you need to show ROI in the work that you're doing. If you have a negative ROI, most likely than not, you're not going to get the committed work and essentially the headcount that you need to grow your business. Other experiences of mine include working at Dun & Bradstreet, where I was able to successfully drive 8-figure type businesses, SaaS-related products. And then when I was at Adobe, this was more of my B2C experience, primarily around adoption and engagement, so making sure our self-help forum was growing. And yeah, as we mentioned earlier, master's rowing athlete. I think this is also a very important thing. If you can find a passion or hobby where you are exhibiting teamwork, leadership, it's a way of kind of giving back to the community once you've cemented a lot of time in this hobby. So for me, it's that, and I think it's paying off in dividends. So for today's conversation, what I want to do is give more of a tactical guide to getting that right strategy, getting that right model, and then making sure you have that approval and go ahead. So we'll talk a little bit about strategy. We'll focus on creating a narrative around this strategy, right? It's not just creating, let's say, bullet points of, hey, these are the components for my product strategy, but rather let's create that story, and this is the story that you need to tell your director and your leader. We're going to then add in the why components, and then actually go through an exercise of building a financial model, essentially forecasting. This is going to be really important because as a leader, your, let's say, director or even CEO is going to have multiple lists of initiatives with various different ROIs, and it's going to be important to show why your business and why your product strategy needs to be selected, why you need the resources, and why you think it's going to bring value to the customers and also your company. And then we'll go through kind of how leaders think through their decision-making process and how they socialize, or how you can then socialize the product strategy. So first off, in any type of business, you really need to know, one, the industry that you're operating in, and two, the type of business. So again, it's going to be really important to know what your company vision is, what your company strategy is, and then from there, what are the respective product strategies, and then the respective roadmaps underneath. For this conversation, we're just going to focus on product strategy. Your leaders and, of course, directors and others should know what the vision and the company strategy is because they're the ones that need to be making these larger choices. But if you are kind of moving up the ranks, you should know product strategy and really your company strategy in the next 3 to 5 years out, right? So knowing that, we're going to go into product strategy. These, I think, are the most critical components in any type of strategy that you work towards. One is really understanding the key pain points and the problems that your customers are facing. Two, what segments are these problems coming from in your current customer segment? Three, what value proposition are you going to provide for your customers? Four, how does it differ compared to, let's say, other competitors out there? And again, an example within Amazon is we don't really look at competition. We just care always about the customer. So customer facing first, ignore the competition. However, there's some truth to also knowing what's in the market because sometimes people might be behind or companies might be behind. So it's important to have that in your product strategy. And lastly, in terms of channels, it's very clear, or you need to know where specifically your customers live or where your users live and operate and figure out a way to acquire and retain them in those channels, right? So now that you know these 5 key product components of a strategy, it's important to know when this needs to be enacted, right? When does someone create a product strategy? For one, if your company is doing a new initiative, right, it's a good time to essentially use the market insights maybe your UX research team has committed to or completed, and from those insights, you might be able to make a product strategy from that data. Second is, and again, if you're part of a larger company like the PayPals, Amazons, Adobes, right, there's always strategic planning that happens in a, biannual cadence. It is at these conversations where you as a product leader need to be ready to make a case and a product strategy and convince your organization that, hey, we want to do this because this is the feedback we've been hearing and why we need to build it because of this X ROI, for example. And lastly, internal alignment. So again, if something is not going very well in your company, or let's say the product is not getting the results or the intended impact, right? It might make sense to course correct and figure out what that new strategy might be. In that case, you need to quickly go through a strategy exercise and figure out what to do. And that's something that usually a product leader will be able to manifest quickly, get the alignment, work with the right stakeholders, and then build the case. So that's when you create a product strategy. So now that we have those 5 key components, in and of themselves, it's not good enough. We need to create a story around it, right? A narrative. And so in order to create a narrative, we're going to take those key components, but we're also going to add a few more important tidbits. So if you look at the bottom row, it's important to know what is this opportunity, what is this ROI that we are going to be providing for our customers and for our business, right? ROI in this case could be adoption, it could also be revenue. It really depends on the business in which you are operating in, right? Another key important thing is when is this launch day going to be, right, for our customers? This is important to note because if it's going to take 2 or 3 years to get to this point, ROI is not going to be realized this year, but 3 years down the line, it might not be the right investment now. It might make sense to push out and reprioritize something else. So be very clear on what that date looks like, as well as in your narrative, bring in customer testimonials. So again, this is that qualitative data coming in from the different feedback channels that you have operating in your company. Be able to bring that in and tell the right story and picture, right, with this narrative. So, next question is, well, what does this narrative look like? Is it, a 15-page document? Is it a 30-page slide deck? What does it look like? In my experience, I think the best way is actually writing out your strategy, right? And this is something that we do a lot at Amazon, where we actually write 2 or 3 pagers, essentially we call them, and this is where we are going to distill all the information around our strategy. So I recommend a 1-page memo if you want to kind of be quick and kind of your product area, your focus. I think it's important. But then you inject the data, right? And the data will be, what is that value? What is the problem? What is, let's say, some of our competition coming in? How are they potentially eating our market? Explain that in the narrative. And one of the things I have to kind of make note of, and this is a big trend since December, is these AI-related tools, right? My recommendation is don't use those AI tools because the critical thinking skills that you've mastered over the years goes out the door. And so you're letting somebody else be doing all the critical thinking. You can't think for yourself. That seems like they don't need you, and they might displace you. Or product leaders might get displaced, which I want to keep my job. So try to bring your strategy together, create a few narratives in the beginning, and if you feel like you want to include or use ChatGPT, maybe later, maybe you can do that exercise, but it's still not going to give you the data that you need, right? And so you can kind of see in the example to the left, I asked it specifically for, giving me a product strategy, but it's going to give me, fluff, if you will. Like you need to put in the right data, the right numbers, which you have, but you also, you have to be careful with what data you give because of confidentiality, things of that such. So you can only do so much with it, is what I'm saying. So again, write the narrative, tell the right story. So now that we've gone through our product strategy, we've gone through our narrative, let's inject more why components into this narrative. And these are questions that a lot of leaders and CEOs will be asking for. The first of which is, well, is it going to bring that positive ROI to my business, right? Going back to revenue, going back to adoption, is it going to help me retain my users, right? Are we going to retain users, which in turn leads to more revenue, right? What does that look like? Again, figure out what your business model is, tie it back into this opportunity. Next is the user research. So if you have a UX team, again, bring in that results and data from various surveys or the various questionnaires that your team has committed to and completed. This will, again, make a stronger case in the narrative for your leader to understand and justify why this needs to exist or this new product area. And lastly, a key question that I get all the time is, Nick, why now? Why is this the right time to build this? Can we postpone? Can we wait? And so you need to really understand if this is something customers need now and we are going to lose more business. Therefore, we have to commit to it this year and show the numbers, right? Show that, hey, if we do not commit this year, we're going to lose $300 million. That's a big number. If you're thinking in terms of Amazon, that's a very small number because we make over 500 billion or so annually. So 300 million is small. But for me, in the world that I live in, that's large, right, in my product area. But you need to be able to mention that and tell leaders, right? If the ROI is also small, right, like a couple million, in a big company like Amazon, that's something that will most likely be deprioritized, or you should not even mention it to your leaders because it's just too small of an impact number. But yes, in smaller startups, yes, absolutely. If something is in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, big opportunity, and the timing is now, then make the case for it. So now the fun part, we're going to go into that model creation flow. So now, again, we have our why, we created our narrative, right? This is the essentially document that we're going to take to our leader when we do that presentation with him or her. And now to add more evidence to it, we're going to build that model. So again, create the right story. So a quick prompt, and again, it's always best to build these type of cases with an example. So let's say hypothetically, we are in the construction industry, and we know construction companies don't have it easy or an easy way to buy window materials, right? So they're looking for a supplier to get the right materials, kind of like a marketplace example. And so that's the problem that the space is, experiencing. Our solution, let's say I'm the tech company, and our solution is going to be a B2B website that will help procure, let's say, the right windows for these construction companies, right? So that's our solution, that's our problem. Now let's kind of go about the exercise of creating the strategy as well as the model, right? So we'll go back to target segment, right? Let's say hypothetically 30% of our market is in commercial, 70% is in residential, but we know most of our customers are in various locales across the US. We have the West Coast, South, and East Coast, and we notice most of our business is happening in the South. So knowing this data, knowing also our solution and our problem, I'm going to start making some projections, at least for what target customers to go after in year 1, year 2, and year 3, right? So in year 1, I just want to focus on 10% of commercial, focus on the South location because that's where most of our basket of customers lives, right? In year 2, if we count both 30 and 20%, we're going to target 50% of the market and our target audience. And then in year 3, we're going to target the whole thing, 100%, right? And your leader is going to probably ask, well, why did you do this? Why did you think of it this way in year 1 or year 3? Why can't we go 100% in year 1? You need to make a case saying, hey, we might not have the right resourcing or the right tech to launch all these things in year 1, but come year 3, we're going to have a vast, larger marketing and sales team. We're going to have a larger product team. We're just going to have more customers and more feedback coming in, and therefore we can target more. So making the case and explaining that story is very clear and actually very important. So that's how you should think about this when kind of talking through the target segment. Next, anytime you create a model, you need to create assumptions, right? Assumptions are going to be key here. Sometimes they might be all over the place. Your job as a PM is to get it as close as possible to 100% if you can. But again, using either historical data numbers or baselines that you have currently at your company, right? So some examples here include, well, what does the market growth look like for your total addressable market, or TAM, right? If your market's growing 20% year over year, great, I'm going to use that to project out my model. Let's say historical product growth, right? You have been launching products for the past 5 years. You have data around how much growth your baseline product has grown. Use that number to project what that growth looks like as well in your model for this new initiative and area you're going to drive and grow towards. Another thing that's important is, again, the amount of resourcing you need. So for example, you need X number of engineers, you need X number of marketing folks and sales leaders to drive the business. Notice in this example, it's very B2B centric. If you're in B2C, you might need more resources on advertising dollars or potentially more engineers to make something more product focused or product led, right? In B2B, there's still more sales led motions as well as product led, right? Like good products like Slack, of course, they have best of both worlds, right? And so you have to have a mix of both. But again, it's important to know what resources you need because this is what your director is then going to figure out, well, what's that ROI look like? Here's my cost. Here's my potential revenue. Is it positive? Is it growing? Is it exponential, right? That's the case you have to prove. And lastly, and something that's important to note is market conditions. And I think that's very prevalent to our current market, especially last year and the one that we're going in, because sometimes we are, we're in a recession. People are not going to purchase as much. Customers are not going to purchase as much. There could also be, let's say, regulations that come into the play. So in the EU or here in the US, how does your product get impacted by that? That's also critical and important to know, right? And also competition. If competition does come in year 3, 4, 5, how does that impact your model? How does that impact your strategy going forward? Like these are little nuanced questions that leaders will ask because they're essentially, taking apart your model, taking apart your strategy. So having those clear answers really helps. So on top of that, some other additional assumptions to make. And I think this is a really important concept and something that I've learned at Amazon is what is that incremental value you are bringing to the business, right? And what I mean by that is sometimes companies, you might have, let's say, 10 PMs in your company, right? Some of the PM-related work that other teams have committed to and completed and launched, they might indirectly grow your business and grow your goals and your metrics, right? But it's attributed to their team and not necessarily your team. So you have to think through how is the feature tied to your product strategy going to bring this X value and how are you going to track it? So therefore you can say, let's say when you do launch this feature at the end of the year saying, hey, I launched this and it brought $250 million because I launched this and I launched it with this sales team with me as well. So like that's very important and something what you need to express and show. And this applies more in a B2B case, I would say less in B2C environments. Next, make sure you, again, focus on that right business KPI for your team, for your org, right? If you're in, let's say, marketplace platform arena, what does that demand and supply metrics look like? If you're in a freemium kind of arena, what does that free trial conversion to paid subscription look like? If you're in SaaS, I mean, kind of similar, what is that month-to-month revenue? Is it growing? What's that annual, I guess you could say, customer value look like, right? And then lastly, in any type of assumptions and any type of model, project outward, right? Figure out what those projections look like and make sure that they make sense with the assumptions you've built. So knowing that, another kind of key thing to touch on is risk. And so risk is something where if you're in the larger corporate environment, companies want less risk. Legal would like less risk. They don't want anything that will, change the course of our current customer base. I think you can even look at Google, for example. They've been less risk averse in the last 5 to 10 years compared to their earlier days. Why? Because they don't want to lose their current revenue generating, business model, if you will, right? Trying new things is scary, it's risky, it's gambling, and it might not pay out in ROI. And you can see that when certain projects fail or are closed down. And so it's important to note, well, while there is high risk in certain products that let's say you want to launch, it's important to know that sometimes you need to de-risk those specific risks if it is a gambling risk, and sort of say. So a good example of this, and kind of tying it back to our, let's say, construction company scenario, is that let's say we are trying to persuade our leader to make more of a gambling decision, right? So a high reward and a high risk solution. It might make sense actually to de-risk some of that by either A, launching some sort of A/B test and getting data on our certain customer base and say that, hey, we can actually do this for this customer, bring this value. Here's the evidence that we've done already with an A/B test. Or if you have more resources, get a small team of engineers and commit to a simple pilot, maybe a 2-month pilot, get data around that experiment and say that, hey, this actually led to X revenue growth, and we're able to de-risk this larger opportunity to this larger customer base later. And again, when the leader will see something like this, they'll be like, oh, that's not a high risk at all. You guys already proved it out. Let's do it. And now it becomes more of a smart investment. So a high reward, low risk deal. So that's what you kind of want to do as a PM. If it is something of a high risk, figure out ways to de-risk for your leader. Again, illegal and leaders don't like to take risks, depending on what company you're at, of course. But startups, I know, definitely take the larger risks. That's good. You want to be risky, but smart at the same time. So now for the fun part, let's kind of add in all of our assumptions and information we know about our product strategy and start building out that model and what that looks like. So we have, again, from the top, our product growth, we have our market growth, we know our headcount. Our assumption here is that, let's say, each person in marketing and sales and in, let's say, engineering is $200,000 per head, or HC, right? Is there any regulations in our space within the construction industry? We'll say no. Is there competition? Yes, and therefore our market will decrease by -5% year over year. And then based on our target segment that we've identified and our problem, this is what's going to happen in year 1, year 2, and year 3. So again, if you think about like the whole pie, which is 100%, in year 1, we're going to target 10%, in year 2, 50%, and in 3, 100% of the market, right? And that's going to be important when we show and project our growth in our model. Then what's the engineering cost, right? So in engineering, we'll need X number of headcount, and in marketing and sales, we'll also need, let's say, X number of headcount. But the key thing to know with marketing and sales is that there's going to be a 200% year-over-year growth. And in engineering, you can ignore for engineering, assume that's a 20% growth, not a 200% growth. But for marketing and sales, it's an exponential growth, and you're going to see how that impacts the model and whether this business idea makes sense or not, right? And then given that we are in a recession, we're going to say that the market is contracting at minus 10% year over year, right? So taking these into account, let's build out our year one, right? So you as a PM, you already know the total addressable market. You know your TAM. You know the serviceable market in which you yourself are operating and your business. So a serviceable market here will be our startup, our B2B construction company startup. We know we can get 5% of the TAM in year one, which is great. That's roughly 50% of the market. But because of our target segment in which we're operating, only 10%, we're only going to get 10% of the 50 million, which is 5. And I'm like, that's decent, right? That's nice. But in terms of our cost, in order to get and build this product, it's going to take 5 engineers at 200,000, so that's $1 million. And then marketing and sales, 10 headcount, plus 200% growth year over year. So marketing and sales is 2 million, okay? So roughly our ROI, if we do a quick calculation, 5 over 3 million, it's 166% growth, which that's positive. That seems nice. Leaders might be interested so far. They might take the bait. But let's see what happens as we go on to year 2, 3, 4, and 5. What happens? So in year 2, now the TAM is growing, right? Market is growing by 20%, as well as our serviceable market stays the same at 5%. But you see the market's growing for us at 60 million. But now, we've got good success in our first year. We plan on going and targeting different target segments, which requires us to get more marketing and sales headcount to get to these markets. So now in year 2, you can see we're actually getting 30 million in revenue instead of 5. And we've also hired a lot more marketing and sales, $4 million worth there. So now if we look at our ROI from 30 million divided by 5.2 million, we're at 560 or 580% ROI. That's very good, right? We're growing almost at 2x or 3x output. So that's positive. This is a good story to tell the leader, right? So let's project years 3, 4, and 5 and see what happens, right? So this is us projected outward. And we notice something interesting here happening, right? As the market is expanding and growing, as our product is expanding and growing in the various target segments, you'll notice that our marketing sales headcount is ballooning, right? From 4, 8, 16, 32 million. And you'll notice that year 5, even though we're making $103 million for this product, right? Unfortunately, our cost is 32%, or 32 million, sorry. But what's interesting is the return on investment, right? You can kind of see a parabolic kind of shape here happening where our highest ROI is actually in year 3, but then it starts decreasing, which is interesting. And this is something that has actually happened to me where I did present numbers like this to a leader, and he started drilling me on what was going on in years 3, 4, 5. And the story, I didn't have convincing data to back my case otherwise, so I kind of failed at least at that presentation. But the point I'm trying to make here is if you see something like this, right, you need to start questioning your assumptions and your model, right? And this might make sense for you now to then go to your marketing and sales leader and work through specific numbers, especially in marketing and sales headcount, what that looks like in years 3, 4, 5. So maybe, you could work with your partner and say, hey, maybe we don't need sales leaders in year 3, 4, 5. Because our product has been growing successfully in years 1 to 3, we can start doing more product-led motions and therefore let the engineering team do more effort there, grow the product there, grow more revenues that way, and reduce, let's say, the sales and marketing headcount over time. And therefore, we can still continue to get that more positive ROI or at least some sort of growth. So let's say you've had that conversation with your sales leader. You both come to an agreement that, hey, we're not going to grow 200% year over year, but rather 20%, let's say. And so if it's 20%, now if we revise the numbers in years 3, 4, 5, you'll actually see, hey, we're still up in the 700 percentile in terms of ROI. It's still moving up and to the right, but now you've made a better case that you can sell to your leader, right? And I think that's the story that you want to tell. Your leader and entrepreneur, CEO, right? They're going to be very interested in this chart. This chart accompanied with that narrative to tell the story. So if you have these 2 examples, by the way, you should be able to very clearly and concisely convince your leader that, yes, we want to go with your strategy. Now, there's other things that, let's say, your CEO or director is going to be looking at. It's not just your strategy, it's others in the business. And so it's going to become paramount to make sure your thinking, your data, and your model is very clear, concise, they can read it, they can understand it, right? And that's why I think, at least in my career so far within Amazon, within Dun & Bradstreet, being able to commit and share these type of documentation with them usually leads to a yes for the most part. So now that we've done the model exercise, we built our model, we've built our narrative, and we added the right data elements, adding the why and adding the key aspects of our product strategy. Once you finish presenting this data and information to your leader, now is the time for them to make that call, right? And typically there's three things that a leader will do here, or a decision maker. It's either going to be yes, I approved it, no, I don't approve it, or maybe. And most likely than not, it's going to be a maybe, which is what usually happens in my case, where they might come back to me saying, hey, the model doesn't quite make sense, the numbers are too low. How can we fix that, or how can we adjust that? Can you fix your assumptions in certain aspects? Or they might say flat out, no, we can't do this because of other initiatives and other priorities that we have. In that case, you should probe your leader and ask, well, why is this a no, right? What was inside of your decision-making process or framework to make this call? Because again, sometimes it's not very transparent, and you need to kind of figure out why the leader said that. Kind of listen to the body cues as well, because sometimes you can see facial expressions when certain things are said in the talk, or let's say when they're reading your narrative, right? Figure out what that is, what that means, and then if you can come back to your leader with a better business case or better product strategy, by all means do that, because I think it's going to reap the rewards and kind of get you to where you need to go in your career as well. So this is normally how they would go through the process, and there are only three options in which they can kind of give you at the end of the day. And then lastly, let's say you have that approved strategy, things are great. Now it's time to essentially get that partner alignment. So again, whatever model you built, now you need to talk with your sales and marketing leaders, see if you can get the right headcount, talk with your UX team, talk with your engineering team to build the right product, get that buy-in, right? As well as make sure you have time to socialize this new product strategy that is approved to all your teams, get the feedback you need, and then when you're ready, get back to the tactical approach of things, of getting into that roadmap and building that out. So that's how I would essentially socialize things. So with that, as a recap, right, my goal today was to help you understand better ways to convince your leader. I think these are the necessary tools to help you get there by creating the right story and creating the right model in which you can get a more successful approval, so therefore you can grow your career, get the successful outcomes, because at the end of the day, as a leader, you want to show that you were able to commit to X dollars in the business or X adoption. This is kind of what tells a better story in your product journey. So I hope this was able to tell that or paint that picture. And yeah, if you have any questions, I guess start sending them my way. But appreciate everyone's time and being here. So good questions. Okay, let's start from the top, right? So why was the MarketNate sales growth a linear growth rate rather than a function of the market growth? Good question. So I think for, disclaimer for this kind of talk, I didn't go to the nitty gritty. I tried to give a very basic, simple model to kind of share a case point. But to your point, yes, you would actually grow it with the market. So depending on how the market trajectory is, as well as your previous sales team, how they were growing and what that percent looks like, take that number and model it that way in the model itself. So I think, yeah, that's a good question. Do you have a high risk, low reward example? Usually those just get deprioritized. So a low reward might be low reward, high risk. I think anything where legal is going to, if we were, let's say, releasing certain data into the market, right, and say, hey, this is something that our company normally doesn't do, and if we do release certain data to our customers or users, it's going to put us at risk at a legal standpoint. There's a really low reward if there's no financial gain or if there's no financial backing in any way there. And I think legal, or let's say even your directors, might shut down the concept. So that could be one example. But usually I wouldn't even actually share examples like that to my directors and others, just because it's not a worthy example. In terms of the other question, so how to get leader buy-in on an initiative with lesser budget than lastly in a not so good economy? So good question. So because you have a lesser budget and it's not so good economy, this is where you need to get creative in figuring out, are you going after the right problem that is crucial for you to gain either revenue or adoption, right? Focus on that right problem and customer pain point, and making sure you also target the right segment, right? You're not building a strategy for everybody, you're building it for a niche user, which can then later be expanded to a larger market, right? So if you're having trouble getting buy-in, I think you need to get creative. And I think everybody needs to get creative, I think, this year and next year. So figure out how to do that with the resources that you have. And then how do you get buy-in from leaders when the business is not performing as expected from multiple years? Where did that question go? Oh, okay, I don't know where that went. But how does this strategy relate to Amazon's working backward approach? This is similar to the working backward approach. I would say it's slightly modified to kind of relate to other orgs and other companies. The reason I say that is Amazon's way of doing business is very different because we operate in a different business space than, let's say, a SaaS or let's say a freemium. Even though we have business models in those areas, Amazon is very different. And so I would take components of my conversation and talk and apply it to your circumstance and your business model and your company. So if you do, let's say, PowerPoints, do a PowerPoint, but making sure you can still tell the right story and making sure you can still bring in the right model. I think that's critical here and important. In terms of suggestions on convincing leadership on not pursuing a new initiative, or at least delaying that pursuit, to not pursue a new initiative. So that one, that's an interesting one. I would say for that one, if you want to convince a leader not to pursue, you need to make sure you have essentially the ammunition and data backing on another initiative that will bring more ROI than, let's say, the one that they want to pursue, right? I think sometimes it can be personal decisions when you get up there in like a VP level or executive suite, thinking, hey, we have to do this because they might believe in it, but they might not have the data. Sometimes I think it might make sense to convince them with the data and the research that you've done and ask them, well, do you have the same data and research for your thing that you want to implement? And if they don't, you show them your case, your data, and you prove that to them, and then maybe they might change their mind, right? But if they have the data and the numbers to back it, it might be a harder sell, just FYI. But yeah, use data in this case, right? I think PMs are good leaders at getting the right data, telling the right story with the data, and then being able to drive impact. So this is where you're going to have to negotiate and be able to persuade. So if you are, let's say, even a people manager, so director managing a few PMs, figure out how your PMs can leverage and get the right data and numbers and present the right story and case, so therefore you can essentially make a case to your leader and say, this is exactly what we need to do. If we don't do this, it's going to hurt our business compared to this initiative. And then how do you get finance to back your model before approaching leadership? So typically how I like to do it is I build the model first, then I go to finance and they kind of course correct and give me better numbers. If you even have a finance team. If you don't, you'll probably need to do it yourself as a product leader. But normally I would go to finance second because finance is dealing with 30, 40 different teams, various different business models. And so I'll build the first one. They need to essentially proofread, look at it, making sure I'm using the right numbers in terms of market growth, business growth, and then check if my assumptions make sense. That's all what a finance leader will do. It's still up to me to project outward and then share that right story.
Nick, I'm going to interrupt you there because we're going to have to keep moving on.
Sounds good.
But this is awesome. Can everybody thank Nick for the presentation?
There you go. Thanks.